Good afternoon from the College of Aviation Atrium on the campus of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. It is the Marc Bernier Radio Program Special Edition, the President Speaker Series. On behalf of President John Johnson, we welcome you to this live radio broadcast where the public is invited at the College of Aviation on this beautiful campus and this beautiful Thursday afternoon. For this first hour of our program, our guest will be Senator George LeMieux of Florida, United States sitting senator, in our first ever interactive town hall involving a sitting United States senator. He's here for the full hour. We'll talk about what is happening in Washington, his vision for the future, and we'll take telephone calls. Plus, for those of you who are driving about, we're in the rear of the campus near the new construction. Find a parking space and join us here. The senator will be with us for one full hour, and our radio audience can call in. They'll be asked their first name, where they're calling from, and they can pose their question directly to Senator LeMieux. On behalf of all of us here at Embry-Riddle, Senator George LeMieux, welcome to WNDB and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
Well, Mark, thanks for having me. It's great to be here today, and I'm excited to be at Embry-Riddle. They're doing wonderful work training future pilots, future folks who are going to maintain these aircraft, and aerospace engineers. And that's really the kind of jobs we need to have in Florida. We really need to diversify our economy with these knowledge-based jobs. And I'm so pleased to be here today and see all the success that they're having.
A little bit on the profile before we get to some of the issues and questions from the audience and from our call-in audience as well. An unlikely candidate for this position. You were working on the chief of staff at that time for Governor Charlie Crist, and wouldn't you ever think that it was going to be possible you would get that question, would you serve the unexpired term of Senator Mel Martinez? I think you were on vacation with your wife at the time.
I was on vacation over on the Palm Coast, not too far from here, and was with my 3 sons, and we were taking a little beach break. My wife told me when we were on that vacation we were going to have another baby, which was an unexpected surprise, a good surprise. And I got a call from the governor saying, would you consider yourself for this position and put yourself forward? Where, he said he was going to interview a number of people. And I was honored to be considered. I frankly, Mark, didn't think I would get it. There were so many good folks that he was talking to. And when I got the call eventually to get it, it was a big surprise, but it was sure a privilege, and I've been privileged to serve there.
Just a follow-up, during that time of not knowing, you had work you were doing, and I believe you said in your remarks at Tiger Bay earlier today, you would have conversations with Governor Crist about everything but the prospects of coming into the Senate position.
Yeah, as I said earlier today, it was really awkward because I would talk to the governor about different issues of policy or politics at the time, and I had been his chief of staff, so we had a close relationship, but we would not talk about the fact that I was under consideration, so it was sort of everything but that. It was very awkward, but as I said today, sort of as a little bit of a humorous moment, it's not as awkward as it is now.
We want to explain to our radio audience that, and also for any folks that come in as we're doing this, the President Speaker Series is geared to educate the general public as well as our student population here about the process of public policy. Senator LeMieux is filling the unexpired term of Senator Mel Martinez. He is not a candidate in this election cycle. But of course, the world of politics and media is swirling about the prospects for Senator LeMieux to make a possible Senate run himself in the year 2012. You were even asked that question at lunch today.
I was. And it's humbling for people to think well enough that they would want me to go back to serve in some way, some capacity, potentially even to go back to the United States Senate. And I feel very privileged, as we've talked about before, Mark, to be in public service, especially such a critical time. A time when we're fighting 2 wars at the same time, which we haven't done since World War II, a time when we're recovering from the worst financial meltdown since the Great Depression, a time when we're in the worst recession in Florida that anyone can remember, and a time when really I think our values are being challenged, and we're going to have to figure out whether or not we want to preserve the American dream, preserve American exceptionalism, or live in a world where we have diminished expectations. So it is an important time, and because it's an important time, I am going to consider future public service. But as I said today, just like the president has the veto pen, Mrs. LeMieux has the veto pen as well. So we have 4 small kids, and it's going to have to be a family decision. So that's something we'll be talking about in the coming months.
One follow-up before we start on issues, your relationship now with Governor Crist, candidate for the Senate himself. Does it exist?
Well, we haven't talked in a while, and it's a very heated political time. I expect that we'll talk after the election is over here in 2 weeks. I certainly will call him no matter the result, and because he's a person that I've been friends with for a long time. I don't like the decisions he's made, and I've told him that before he made the decision. I urged him to stay in the Republican Party. But I will always be grateful to him for the opportunities he's provided me to serve the public. So it's a difficult situation, but hopefully we can get past politics, and he and I can still be friends after this election.
As a matter of policy in our President Speaker Series, we have invited Senator Bill Nelson to have his own event and have been speaking with staff this week to give him an opportunity to showcase what his vision is for America in the next year as well. We are going to take questions from our audience, and at any point, Ashley, who is with me here, has a roving microphone, and we'll walk around and you can ask your question directly of the senator. I wanted to sort of set the stage, if I can, in this event by talking about debt and deficit. Most Americans are very concerned about the future, obviously with health care coming in, the Obamacare situation, but the deficit and debt that this country has now in front of it. When you came in, the number was one number, then it became another number, and there's a fear that that number goes even higher.
Well, Mark, this is the thing that amazes me most, and people will often ask me, what's the most surprising thing about serving in the United States Congress? And it's the way the government misspends our money. When I first came to the Congress, sworn in September 10th of 2009, our national debt was about $11.8 trillion. Today it's $13.6. Now, we've gone up more than $1.5 trillion in 13 months. We've gone up from $8.6 trillion in debt in 2007 to $13.6 in 2010. That's $5 trillion in 3 years. It took us 200 years in this country to go $1 trillion in debt, and we just did more than $1 trillion in 13 months, more than $1.5 trillion. It is unsustainable. It is cascading out of control. It's the thing that worries me the most. People say, well, what keeps you up at night? This is what keeps me up at night. I think a future of our country is at stake. I think our government is imperiling America if we don't get this spending under control. I've proposed a measure to go back to 2007 levels of spending. I think that should be a year we should be able to live off the receipts. That was a year when we had still a good economy nationwide, a little slow here in Florida, but still not a recession until December of that month. If we could live within our means, we would have to prioritize what's important, what's not. Government doesn't do any oversight. Government doesn't know what it's spending its money on. We're funding programs from the 50s, 60s, and 70s as priorities because no one's looking under the hood to say, are those the right priorities for this country? No one is there to jealously guard the people's money. If we went back to that 2007 level, we'd balance the budget in 13, and we'd cut the national debt in half by 2020, and we'd save America. I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's common sense, but it's going to take people who have the courage of their convictions to do what's right and then come home.
Senator, if you went back to 2007, would that also take into consideration the amount of money we're spending on war debt? Or is that separate?
No, it's all together. And what I proposed is we would have a debate every year of 50 hours of time on the House and Senate floors that would require us to say, let's go back to the 2007 level spending, and what are we going to prioritize? You know, there's no prioritization in Washington. Everybody gets whatever they want. Everybody gets their pet program. Everybody spends. These agencies grow and grow and grow. Let me give you an example. There's 100,000 people working for the Department of Agriculture. 100,000 people. One for every 30 farmers. We've got farm offices in places where there are no longer farms. Now, we should have a robust Department of Agriculture. They should be, focused on food safety and promoting Americans, our wares and our goods overseas, and all of the things that you want the Department of Agriculture to do, but they should be efficient and effective. These secretaries that come into these agencies, their average stay is 18 months. The bureaucracy calls the cabinet secretaries the hired summer help because they know that they're going to be gone. So because we don't balance our budget and because we don't have any cap on spending, we have no fiscal controls, no discipline. No one looks under the hood to say this program's more important than another. We just add and we add and we add. And the reason why we have to address this now, because we've had debt for a long time, but why we have to address it now is it's cascading out of control. These numbers are getting so big that the portion of our budget each year that we spend on interest payments, debt service, paying for the money that we shouldn't have spent in the past, is growing and growing and growing. This year it's nearly $200 billion. By the end of the decade, under the current projections, it'll be $900 billion. When it's $900 billion, the government will not function. And unfortunately, we won't get to 2020 because the world markets will know that that's the day or that's near the time when the government won't function. So I predict we'll have something like happen in Greece, where the world markets will say we can no longer trust investing in the United States. So you'll see a big stock market decline. You'll see the economy get even worse. We can't wait until 10 years from now to fix this problem. We've got to take affirmative steps next year, the year after that, to show that we're getting our spending under control.
We're going to go to callers. For those of you on hold on, we're going to go to you. And in the audience, Ashley will bring the microphone to you. You can ask your question. For students joining us here in the atrium, come down and ask your question of the senator here. A couple of other things. You have said the government is overstepping its role. Most people would assume that's the health care plan. Are there other areas that you cite that you think are the government overstepping its role?
Well, I think there are a lot of areas. The healthcare is the best example, but our founders believed in limited government. If you go back and read the Constitution, if you go back and read the Federalist Papers, where the documents that were put out to persuade people to adopt the Constitution, to ratify the Constitution in the various states, written by Madison and Hamilton and Jay. Those papers and the Constitution itself talk about limited enumerated powers, that most powers of government should be with your local government, that they should be with your state government. The federal government is involved in every aspect of our life, and this health care bill is the furthest extension of that. Now, I want to put aside whether or not the aims and goals of the health care bill are laudable, because certainly providing health care to people is a laudable goal. But when we're going to, for example, mandate that somebody must buy health insurance, and if they do not buy health insurance, we are going to fine them. If we can do that, I don't know what the federal government can't do. We have never before said that the federal government could penalize you for not doing something. Now, the clause that they use in the Constitution, the power that they use in the Constitution, that the court, mostly the Supreme Court, has interpreted expansively to allow for Congress to do this, is something called the Commerce Clause. And the argument is that if it impacts interstate commerce, then the Congress can regulate it. And they'll say, well, look, health care impacts interstate commerce. Well, the Congress can regulate it. The Congress has never, the United States Supreme Court has never ruled in the history of our republic that your failure to take an action impacts interstate commerce. I talked to our newest Supreme Court Justice, Elena Kagan, before she was confirmed. And I said to her, well, could the United States Congress pass a law that said I had to join a gym in order to stay healthy? And she said, well, that's a ridiculous law. I said, well, it's ridiculous, but could they do it? And she didn't want to answer the question. I said, well, look, it's a relevant question, because now that we're going to make sure that everybody has health care, couldn't we say as a cost-saving measure it's in the best interest of the taxpayer that everybody have to go to the gym so that they stay healthier, so that the cost of health care wouldn't be more? We know that if you are healthy, your health care costs are not as expensive. Couldn't the government fine me if I didn't go to the gym? And that's the problem with where the federal government is. It's in too many parts of our lives. It is abrogating the powers of the states and the local governments. The genius of American democracy is not the power of our government. It's the limits on our government.
You said that 69% of small businesses in this country cannot meet the basic criteria for the upcoming health care plan?
It's been estimated that 69% of small businesses in this country, the health care that they provide will not meet the mandates and the requirements of health care under the new health care law. So the President of the United States said when he was campaigning for this law that if you liked your health insurance, you could keep it. We know that 69% of small businesses will not have a product that complies. They'll have to change it. What happens when they change it? It'll become more expensive to the business. So what's going to happen? And the governor of Tennessee wrote an op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal. Phil Bredesen talking about this issue. He's a Democrat. He said, let me just tell you the math of this. The whole impetus now is going to be for your employer to drop you from health care. And he said this would be much smarter for Tennessee to do, because what they'll do is, this is a subsidized program, this exchange. What the exchange is if you don't have health care, you're uninsured, you'll be able to go out and purchase health care. Sounds good. And depending upon how much you make, you will get a subsidy to help buy it. And if your employer's product doesn't conform, they'll be fined. Or if your employer doesn't provide you with health insurance, they'll be fined, about $2,000 a person. So what he says, the governor says, is, look, if we dropped everybody in Tennessee from the government's health care program, all the state workers, we pay our $2,000 fine, and we give them money to go out and make them whole so they can go out in the marketplace, take their subsidy, and buy health insurance so that that employee's in the same place they were as they were before, we'll save $180 million or something approximate to that in Tennessee. So the big initiative is going to be now for all of these employers to dump everybody into the governmental system. Well, we all know that the governmental system will not work well because the government doesn't function well. It doesn't run business operations well. So people will be frustrated. They'll be concerned. And we will put more people into the federal government's hands, which will end up costing us more money, more spending, more deficits, more borrowing, and then more taxes.
Senator George LeMieux is our guest. We have students that are watching from up above. You can come down and ask your question, and this is really for all of you up there and those of you assembled before us as well as listening on the radio. One of your concerns, Senators, one of these days, one of your 4 children will come to you and say they're moving to Brazil or India or Ireland because the opportunities there are better than are available in the United States. You have said this, you've spoken this and said this to people. How do we stop that from happening? How do we offer hope to these students that they can find meaningful employment in this country?
Well, that's the fundamental question, is what America do we want to live in? Do we want to live in an America that we grew up in where we were only limited by our ambition, by our imagination, where anything was possible, no matter who you are, where you came from, who your parents were, no matter your race, your creed, your color, your sex, that you could achieve your goals? You know, we are a country where people start businesses in their spare bedroom and in their garage and turn them into Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard, or from their dorm room and turn them into Google and Yahoo. This is a country where no one is limited. It's a country where we are exceptional around the world, but we will not be that if this government keeps spending so much money. We will bankrupt the future of this country, and I am worried about that. And I'm not the only person who's worried about it, because recently Tom Brokaw said the same thing. Tom Brokaw said his advice to young people now is to seek middle manager positions in countries like India and China, because that's where the business is going to be. Now, I have a lot of respect for Tom Brokaw. He's written some tremendous books, and he's a very fine journalist. And the fact that one of our leading Americans is saying to young people, get ready to be a middle manager in India or China, that's a pretty sad state of affairs. So what this government has to do is it's got to rein back, and we've got to make some tough choices. But frankly, I don't think that it's rocket science, and I don't think the choices will be that tough as long as we get on top of government, as long as your people and members of Congress that you elect get in there, roll up their sleeves, do their job, and put this country back on the right track.
Ashley, one of our student interns here at Embry-Riddle, will walk through the crowd. If you have a question, raise your hand, and Ashley will come right to you. I think we have a question right there. And we'll also take the phone calls next. So for those of you on hold, hang on. Sir, you're first in your question for Senator LeMieux.
Thank you, Senator, for being here today. You talked about getting spending under control and the deficit and national debt under control. But without controlling entitlements, there's no way of doing that. And anytime anybody talks specifics that are going to be hard-hitting and going to hurt people, they basically get crucified. You don't hear about them again after another year or two. They're gone. Could you offer any specifics or a guideline? Maybe I don't want you to be gone in a year or so, but is there some pathway we can start working on, like freezing some kind of spending? I mean, on the regular expenditures, a freeze just means reducing the cost of the rate of increase. When you say go back to 2007 spending limits, is that without automatic escalations thereafter? Are we going to go back to zero-based budgeting thereafter, or what are we going to do? And then what maybe on entitlements could you offer?
How do you go back to 2007?
Well, you have to do everything. You can't not do entitlements, because entitlements now is something like 2 out of every $3. So you have to take and tackle entitlements. I talked to Erskine Bowles. He is the former chief of staff to President Clinton. He is on this commission along with Alan Simpson. He's the head of it on this deficit reduction commission. And he said to me, do you realize that every dollar that we take in tax receipts is going to pay for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security? Think about that. Every dollar that we take in is only enough to pay for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Every other function of government some 42 cents on every dollar, whether it's the FAA who guides your planes, whether it's the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard to keep us safe and free, whether it's Department of Transportation, Commerce, Labor, Justice, Attorney General, everybody else, every other function of government is borrowed. So we have to tackle entitlements. Now, you're right. People who talk about entitlements tend to limit their political future. But I think the American people realize that we can't be coy about this anymore. That in order to ensure that Social Security, for example, is going to be around for our seniors, let alone around for people my age, that we're going to have to make changes for people who are younger. Now, Marco Rubio, who I'm supporting in the Senate race, has a plan, and I think it's a good place to start the discussion. He says, look, people who are over the age of 55, they'll get exactly what they have now, and it will be just as it was promised, and nothing will change. But people under the age of 55, which would include someone like me, we're going to have to raise the retirement age. Now, we've raised the retirement age before. It's up to 67. We had a gradated way of raising it over time. We're going to have to raise it more. When Social Security started, I'm told, that the average life expectancy was 65 years. People are living into their 80s now and longer. So for those of us who are younger, we're going to have to raise the age on Social Security, most likely. And we may have to means test it. If you're making a couple $100,000 a year in retirement, you probably need to take less Social Security. Now, this is violative, I understand, of people's concept of Social Security, because Congress has told people all these years that you've paid in, that it's your money, and that you're getting your money back. But what Congress has not told people is that they've stolen all that money. That money's all gone. There is no lockbox, as Al Gore said, with a bunch of money in it where you paid in. You have no account as an individual that says, Joe Smith, the money you paid in Social Security. The truth of it is that in the 1970s, Congress started to borrow the money out of the Social Security Trust Fund to spend on projects. It was their piggy bank, and they wrote IOUs. And the only reason why that's not happening so much now is because for the first time in the history of this country, more people are taking out benefits than paying in because the baby boomers are starting to retire. And that's why you see us having to go to China and other countries to borrow all this debt, borrow all this money and incur all this debt, because Congress can't take it out of Social Security anymore. But Social Security, frankly, is relatively easy to fix if you'll have some people who will have the courage of their convictions. We can preserve it for seniors and people who are about to be seniors, and for those of us who are a little younger, we're going to have to get a little older before we get it. And by the way, for people my age, I'm in my 40s, most of us don't think we're getting it anyway. So if you could tell folks that you will get it, it's just you may have to be 70 or 71 or something to get it when you get there. For people my age, I think that's a willing compromise.
Senator George LeMieux is our guest. The President's Speaker Series live on WNDB Radio from the College of Aviation Atrium on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Senator, let's take a couple of phone calls. We ask you to be brief, to the point. We'll begin in Daytona Beach, Raleigh. You're on WNDB and from Embry-Riddle with Senator George LeMieux.
Senator, what hope do we have that any of these things you've talked about, any of these problems you've illustrated, will ever be solved if we can't get the senators and the congressmen to read the bills before they vote on them? Thank you.
That's a good question. This criticism, I think even Nancy Pelosi on the House side said, can't worry about reading it now. We got to get this thing passed, then we'll figure out what's in it. I mean, that's almost a direct quote. But how do we do this? Do we actually have to pass a law, Senator, that requires that people give testimony to having read the bill before they vote on it? Has it gotten that bad, sir?
I don't know if that's the right solution. These bills are almost incomprehensible, to be honest with you. I worked my way through that 2,000-page health care bill. The truth of it is that in order to understand it, it's modifying thousands and thousands of other pages of federal statutes. You would have to have all of the other federal statutes in the room at the same time that you read that 2,000-page bill. What we need to do is not pass 2,000-page bills. Congress doesn't do comprehensive very well. What we need to do is be limited and surgical. I like to say that we should operate with the surgeon's scalpel, not the bureaucrat's bludgeon. Let's do things efficiently. Let's do them in a smaller way. We had a Republican alternative on health care. I think it was 70 pages long, maybe as much as 100, but it was not 2,000. And if we wouldn't try to tackle so much and rewrite a whole sector of the economy, 1/6 of the economy, we wouldn't have all these unintended consequences. I think smaller in this case is better.
If you have a question in the audience, raise your hand, and Ashley will come. Dr. Brady.
Thanks for being here, Senator. We appreciate your visit to our college. My name is Tim Brady. I'm wondering if, and thanks, by the way, for supporting H.R. 5900. That we believe in the long run is going to really help the university here. As you know, that regional airline entry, first officer entry, the salaries are really abysmal. They're very low, and that acts as a disincentive for students that are graduating and attending Embry-Riddle that are going to be professional pilots. Do you see any government influence in trying to change that dynamic?
Well, I think we need to change it. I'm not sure how government can do it, but I'd be open to ideas. I'm always a little reluctant and reticent to have the government interfere with things that should be market-based decisions, but I think $24,000 starting salary for a new pilot who is flying folks around is just abysmally low. And there are a few professions in our lives where we want to make sure, I think, that people are paid well. I want my doctor paid well. I want my kid's teacher paid well. And I certainly want my pilot paid well. I want them not to be stressed out about their student loans and how much they're making and trying to work too many hours because they're not being paid enough. So we probably need to think about those requirements, but I want to do it in a way that doesn't do too much interference to the marketplace. I'm open to ideas about it, and I know I'm in the right place to get those ideas.
By the way, that's part of an email question that came into us, Senator, to ask your input, your take on the president's plan to revise the way that student loans are managed, where the banks are being taken out, the government takes more control. How do you feel about that?
Well, this is another example of misguided policy in my view. So in the health care bill, in order to create the appearance that the health care bill was revenue neutral, they got rid of the private student loan market, the Sally Mays of the world. By the way, we had 800 people in Panama City. Second biggest employer in Panama City, Florida, was the Sally Mae folks, all of whom, or a great deal of whom now, are going to lose their job because the government took them out of business. The government said, we're not going to have you service these student loans anymore. By the way, people were very happy with the customer service. And they said, we're going to take it back because you shouldn't be able to make a profit on the interest, the difference between what you lend the money out and what it's paid back on. So now the federal government is going to take that spread and use that money to offset the cost of this new health care bill. So what we've done is we put a lot of private sector people out of work in the middle of the worst recession that anyone can remember. I think it's exactly the wrong thing to do. I fought against it, but it was in the health care bill. I can't imagine. That was reason alone to vote against the health care bill.
Let's take a phone call from New Smyrna Beach before we go back to our audience. Mike, you're next on WNDB, live from Embry-Riddle in the President Speaker Series Town Hall with Senator George LeMieux. Your question.
Thank you for taking my call, Mark. Senator LeMieux, first let me tell you that I think you've done a great job, and I look forward to you replacing Bill Nelson. You and Marco Rubio would make a great pair of senators for our state. Let me get to my question. Senator DeMint said the other night on Fox that all the Tea Party candidates that have lost in the primaries have supported the winning Republican candidates, but not all incumbent Republican candidates that have lost have supported the winners, such as Castle, Bennett, and Murkowski. Do you see it like he does, that we as Republicans have a problem with the so-called ruling class Republicans?
Well, you make a very good point. I saw my colleague Jim DeMint's comments about this, and he said exactly what you said, which is the folks who are more conservative, who lost their primaries, supporting the moderate nominees, but not the vice versa. We as Republicans need to support, wherever you are on the ideological spectrum, I believe you support your nominee. Now, there is a problem. Look, it's not just a Democratic problem in Washington. There is a problem with people who've been in Washington too long. And it's not politic to say this, but there's a problem with some Republicans who've been there too long. We squandered our opportunity as Republicans at the beginning of this past decade. We had a Republican president, Republican House, and Republican Senate, and those Republicans in Congress acted in many ways in the same ways that were critical of Democrats. They spent too much. Now, the truth is of the deficit that was incurred in the 8 years of the Bush administration, the Obama administration in 18 months has already blown past it. In 18 months, they blew past what was incurred in 8 years. But we need to make sure that the people who go to Washington, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, are going to care about balancing the budget. Balancing the budget is not a conservative or liberal idea. It is common sense. If you want big government, which I don't, but say you do, you still want your government to be efficient and effective to achieve your goals. If you want small government, you want those dollars to be spent. No one wants fraud. No one wants waste. No one wants duplicativeness. No one wants inefficiency. We should all be able to agree upon that.
In the audience, if you have a question, raise your hand, and Alicia will come to you. Dr. Johnson.
Yes, sir. Senator, thank you on behalf of the university for attending today and for this excellent discussion. I have concern about unemployment. And I feel that the long-term answer is the job-creating genius of American industry and American business. It always has been, and I think it always will be. But I have a special concern about our returning vets. In each of our wars, following the war ending, American vets have returned. There's always been a reduction in force, and we've had a significant number of veterans trying to enter the job market. That's going to exacerbate an already challenging situation. So at Embry-Riddle, we have a large number of vets that are participating in the Yellow Ribbon program, and we're very proud to have them with us. And I'm sure that you know that we have one of the largest ROTC programs in the nation as well. But my question is, what can we do to help those returning vets as we have the inevitable reduction in force that's going to occur? What can we do to help train them, educate them, and find jobs for them?
Well, you bring up a great point. I mean, first of all, the economy is very dire. In Volusia County, the unemployment rate is 12.6%. It's 11.7% in Florida. Up the street in Flagler, it's 16%. It's the worst unemployment on record in the history of record keeping in Florida. So we have a very difficult challenge. What government is mostly doing, in my mind, is making things worse, like with this health care bill, like not agreeing upon what our taxes are going to be next year. So when I talk to small business people around the state, they say, look, I can't hire another person because I don't know what the rules of the road are. If I hire another person, am I going to be fined because they fall afoul of some magic number in the health care bill? What are my taxes going to be? Everyone's taxes are going up December 31st because Congress has failed to act. I voted against adjourning the Congress because I thought that we should set taxes. I met with an accountant earlier this week in Jacksonville who told me all of his business clients don't know what to do. They don't know what their taxes are going to be next year. Small businesses file as individuals, as subchapter S corporations. Their taxes may go up 5%. Taxes on dividends going up, taxes on capital gains. So I think Washington has created a lot of uncertainty, which is freezing the job market. But specifically to your question about our vets, these young men and women, and I visited them in places all around the world, from Afghanistan to Africa to Yemen, they are putting themselves in tremendous peril. And they are really our best and brightest. And I'm so proud of the work that they do. When they get back to this country, we need to honor them in every way that we can. And if they want to go to college and they need continuing training, the government should pay for it. We owe them that. Well, we've done some of that work in this country. We certainly historically did it with the GI Bill. But we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. I cannot begin to tell you how difficult it is in the life of a young man or woman who is representing this country and fighting for our freedom in Afghanistan. What a horrifically difficult battle that is. When you go to Afghanistan, you feel like you're landing on Mars. It is that inhospitable of a place. So I would love to work with you, Mr. President, on different ideas that we could put forward to make sure that these folks have the right and opportunity to have an education when they get back.
For listeners and viewers just joining us, this is a live town hall, the President Speaker Series at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. We're originating our program from the College of Aviation Atrium. For the students just joining us up above, you're welcome to come down and pose your question directly to the Senator, and we'll go back into the audience. For anyone else who has a question, raise your hand. In the meantime, let's take a call from Daytona Beach. Don, you're next on WNDB with Senator George LeMieux. Hello.
Okay, hello, Mark. Thanks, and hello, Senator LeMieux. This is Don Kane. My question is in regard to energy independence. Senator, we spend about $260 billion a year, which is one-third of our trade imbalance on importing fuel. And it bothers me because, in a sense, we're subsidizing the war on terror on both sides of the pump. And it's just ridiculous. If we had to do that back in World War II, if we had to buy our fuel from the Nazis or the Japs, we'd be in terrible shape. But my question is, shouldn't we be concerned as the number one priority to develop energy independence here on liquid fuels, to put some people to work? For example, here in Florida, we could often thought we could develop cellulosic technology in connection with the citrus and methanol, develop methanol, to develop as a liquid fuel.
I'm going to jump in, Don, because it's kind of hard for us to hear all of it, but Don is referring to, Senator, alternative fuels, including the use of citrus byproducts. Is this something that we have a realistic chance of engaging in to make us less dependent on foreign oil?
It is, and I think putting the debt aside is the number one challenge to the future of the country. In the top 2 or 3 is energy independence. This is not a conservative or liberal difference. We all should be for not sending, as your caller said, hundreds of billions of dollars overseas every year to people who don't like us that much. We should be energy independent. Now, that we're a long way from being there, but the biomass, the wind, solar, different things that we're trying here in Florida, University of Florida's got a great program where they're working on biomass technology, trying to make that more efficient. Florida Power and Light, through their Next Era Energy venture, is one of the leading producers of wind energy in this country. A lot of folks don't know that. The number one thing we need to do on energy independence is we need to build more nuclear power plants. We need to build 100 nuclear power plants in this country. We invented this technology, and after the 3 Mile Island scare, we shut it down. And now countries like France produce 85% of their electricity from nuclear power. Once you build a nuclear power plant, and it's expensive to build it, but once you build it, it is cheap and it is completely clean. And it is amazing to me that we have stopped since the late 70s building these power plants. Now there's one in the pipeline, so to speak, in Georgia, but the Chinese are about to build 50 of them. Now, can you imagine what it would mean for the world if we didn't have to buy foreign oil? What would it do to the politics of the Middle East? What would it do to Iran if they couldn't sell their energy? It would change all of the geopolitical politics. We would, in many ways, take away the status of our enemies and their ability to cause us problems. I think it's a national security issue. I also think that we should get off of petroleum to the extent that we can. Right now we can't do it. We're going to have to keep drilling. We're going to have to keep having domestic oil. But we should be the leaders in the world in this technology. We should be, if there's anything that we should be incentivizing, it is this clean technology. Natural gas. T. Boone Pickens has a plan to have all of the commercial trucks in this country run on natural gas. It would take some retrofitting of these trucks, but once we did it, we'd be tremendously less dependent upon foreign oil. As Americans, as the greatest innovators, the greatest entrepreneurs the world has ever seen, this is something that we should be focusing on. We need to get the regulation out of the way on the nuclear power plant side so that we can get these power plants built.
I want to direct you into another area, Senator, before we take more calls and people with questions from our audience. We haven't touched on immigration yet. We still don't have any new immigration policy. Arizona has embarked on their own. They were shut back by the courts. There's been debate if Florida should have a new immigration policy of its own or whether the federal government will have the fortitude to move ahead with a new immigration policy. What do you see happening, sir?
Well, we need an immigration policy. The situation now is untenable. The federal government has failed to meet its obligations. We had a situation with the Republican president, with my president, Senator Mel Martinez, and Democrats like Ted Kennedy, all working to try to get immigration done. And they couldn't get it done, which is a shame because it needed to be done. We've got 10 to as many 14 million Americans in this country who are here illegally. We have an unsecure border with Mexico. We have tremendous violence in Mexico now with the drug cartels taking over, reminiscent of what Colombia was like 10 years ago. I'm going to be traveling to the border in Arizona with my colleagues Senator Kyle and Senator Barrasso in a couple weeks because I want to see firsthand the problems down there. John McCain tells me that Tucson, Arizona has the second highest kidnapping rate in the world now. I do not begrudge the people of Arizona at all for passing that law. If you were scared to death and you had violence in your communities, if you were taking your kids to school and every day or every week more kids were showing up who were the kids of illegal immigrants and they were overwhelming your kids' school, I don't begrudge them at all for doing what they did. They did what they felt they needed to do because the federal government has failed to act. To me, the number one thing is we got to secure that border. Now, people say this a lot. I want to go find out how we're going to do it. In Yuma, Arizona, they're apparently having tremendous success with a double fence with a place for a car to drive down the middle that's being monitored, and they're interdicting 95+% of the folks that try to come in over the border there. I want to see that firsthand so I can gain some more ideas and solutions about how we're going to do it. But we can't grant amnesty to the people who are here. We can't pass the DREAM Act. And my heart goes out to these kids who were brought here through no fault of their own. Their parents brought them here, who want to be able to get a job after they go to college. My heart goes out to them. But we can't address any of those other issues until we secure the border first.
You're listening to a live town hall on WNDB, News Talk 1150, and webcast at www.kennytv.com from the campus of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. If you have a question in our audience, just wave your hand, and Ashley will come by while we wait for that next question. Brian is in Ponds Inlet, and you're on WNDB. Hello.
Yeah, congratulations for this discussion. It's been great. I've heard more common sense in the last half an hour than I have for the last 2 years, I believe. But, and here's my but, how can any of this stuff be accomplished as long as campaign financing isn't addressed and big money plays such an important role in the election process?
Is the caller right? The campaign finance problems stop meaningful reform from happening?
You know, I think that campaign finance reform needs to happen. I think you need transparency. You know, we can't stop people from exercising their First Amendment rights to give money. If we start limiting people's ability to give money, then I think that you fall afoul of what our founders intended and the rights that we have under the First Amendment. But everybody should know who's giving money so that can be an issue within the campaign. If you are being given money by certain special interests, the voters have a right to know that. But I'm not sure that that's the number one problem. I think the number one problem in Washington is that the system doesn't find a way to cap spending. Our founders never intended for the government to grow this large. I don't think they ever foresaw that we would have to balance the budget and make that a requirement of the Constitution. But that's what we need to do. So I think the number one problem is that the legislature, the Congress, doesn't work correctly because there is no accountability on spending. Here in Florida and many other states, our governor has a line item veto. Our president should have that so that he can zero out, pork. You would think that the Democrats in Congress, with a Democratic president, could agree to a line item veto. It would be their president who would get to exercise that power, but they won't. You would think that I could get 40 other Republicans to agree to a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, but I can't. There is a philosophy in Washington that's really just out of touch with Main Street America, and I think those are the most pressing issues facing our country.
There are many Floridians, people listening to this broadcast and webcast, as well as the entire country, is unclear. What is the future of NASA?
Well, this is something that is given me a lot of consternation. I'm very concerned about the future of NASA. Let me back up a little bit and just walk everybody through what happened here in the last year or so. You'll remember that the president came down, did a press conference here not too long ago, and basically his plan, to me, gutted NASA. We were stopping the shuttle program, and he said, by someday, maybe in the 2030s or something, we might orbit Mars or go to an asteroid or do something. A far cry from, by the end of this decade, we will land a man on the moon. A time, a destination that President Kennedy gave us in the early 1960s. Now, we've improved upon that a little in the Congress, and I worked on that bill. But it's a shame that we are where we are. So now we know that we will have a heavy lift vehicle that will take us out of lower Earth orbit and explore space by 2015, 2016. We will add another shuttle launch. That's better than not. But we should never be where we are. We had a Constellation program that we spent nearly $10 billion on that we've now mostly scrapped. The Constellation program was a robust program that Congress failed to fund adequately. And I think because, unfortunately, it was a program that the last administration supported, this administration didn't want any part of it. We're going to lose 9,000 jobs at NASA here in Florida and around the country. And that's going to result in lots of job losses all over when the other businesses that do business with NASA have to pare back as well. There's an article today that says the public school system around Kennedy Space Center will see their enrollment decline by 20%. What is that going to do to real estate prices around Kennedy Space Center when everybody starts leaving town? This is an economic disaster for this part of the state. It is a shame. One of my colleagues said, you know, they don't want to see the day when the Chinese go to the moon and take our flag back. I don't want to explain to my kids why India is on the moon and we're not. It is something that's made us exceptional, the space program. It's expensive. You know, we should be spending more on it. But we spent $787 billion on a stimulus plan that didn't work. What would have been a better stimulus plan than making our space program robust? How many innovations in science in our daily lives came from the space program? How many medical and aeronautical innovations came from the space program? That's exactly the kind of thing that the government should support. There are very few things that the government should be getting involved that, you know, maybe the private sector could. But the private sector is not completely ready to be in space. They're certainly not ready to go to outer space, maybe low Earth orbit, and we want to encourage that. But I think it's something the federal government should pony up and pay for. Like everything in government, it should be efficient and effective, but we are abrogating our leadership, and I think that's a sad day for America.
Is there any reason to believe that if Republicans take the House, they may not have the horses to take the Senate back, but if the Republicans regain control, is there any reason for Americans to believe that NASA will be retooled more to the private sector to save those jobs?
I don't think, Mark, we're going to see any significant change in 2 years. I think you're going to need a new president who believes in NASA's mission, who believes in American exceptionalism, and is going to get NASA back to the place where it is robust and fully funded.
Let's go to phone calls now. And from our audience, anyone who wishes to ask in the final minutes we have with Senator LeMieux, just raise your hand. We'll come right to you. Bob is in Ormond Beach. You're on WNDB, and from Embry-Riddle with Senator George LeMieux. Hello.
Senator, one of the greatest inequities I see in our social programs, an illegal alien with 2 children can draw more funding from our social programs than a wounded vet coming back from Afghanistan. What can be done to fix that?
Well, if you're here illegally in this country, you shouldn't be here. And we're going to have to figure out a way after we secure the border to deal with all the folks here in this country who are here illegally. Some will be able to find a way to stay. Some are going to have to go home. But we don't have the extra money in this country to be paying benefits to illegal aliens. We can't afford the programs we have, let alone the programs most people in Congress want. So we're going to have to look at that very hard. And certainly no one, as I said earlier, should be receiving more preferential treatment than our veterans, who've done so much and sacrificed so much for our nation.
I heard the other day one candidate running for office floated the idea out about merging the Department of Veteran Affairs into the Department of Defense, which I thought that's a scary thing because it addresses the issue you're speaking to. Not enough is done to transition veterans back into our society.
Now, the Department of Veterans Affairs plays a vital role, and our veterans hospitals here in the state play a vital role. We're about to build a new one that I just visited in Orlando on the medical city that they're building there, and it's going to be a great veterans facility. But we have to focus on our veterans. We have to make sure that they come back, that they get all of the health care that they need. Sometimes they need psychiatric care because of the difficulties of fighting in a war. And we need to make sure their families are taken care of while they're gone. This is very difficult. These folks are on very tight rotations. They've had a lot of tours of duty. It's very difficult in their family life.
Let's go back in the audience now. Jim, your question for Senator LeMieux.
Jim Oddie, Republican Executive Committee, and saw you earlier at lunch. We already know there's a huge amount of petrodollars flowing to predominantly Muslim countries, and that the immigration problem on the border is other than Mexicans. So, I mean, what can we do? We know there's training camps that exist that Islam is training here, and they have these madrasas where they're teaching violent overthrow of the government. So what can we do to empower our law enforcement to be able to go in there and keep them from hiding behind that phony beard of religion that they keep claiming when they're here to actually do us damage? Do you think we should give our law enforcement more authority to go in there and so they don't have the protection and the tax deductions of 501c3 companies?
Well, look, if for the folks in this country who are peacefully practicing Islam, more power to them. This is a diverse country. We don't have a one state religion, and we appreciate them being here. For those who are here to harm us, we need to do everything we can to interdict them and stop them. There are some very dangerous people in this world. Let me tell you the name of one of them you may have heard before. There's a guy named Anwar al-Awlaki. He grew up in New Mexico. He now is in Yemen. He's of Yemenese descent. He might be the most dangerous man in the world to the United States of America. He is recruiting Americans, disaffected Americans, to come to Yemen, to come to Somalia, to train in these camps, and come back here and attack us. And he was in connection with Abdullah Muttalib, the Christmas Day attempted bomber. He was in connection and contact with Major Hassan, who killed all the folks at Fort Hood. He was in connection and contact with the New York Times averted bomber. And he's a very dangerous guy. He understands social media. He understands networking. He understands marketing because he grew up in this country. We have to realize we are at war. And it is a war that it's not going to end even the day we leave Iraq and even the day we leave, hopefully soon, Afghanistan after some success there. This war will continue because there are radical jihadists who want to end our way of life, and we're going to have to be vigilant.
A couple of minutes here before we end, a very fast hour. Danny writes in, take care of oil first. Senator, your comment, we have the resources, then develop the alternatives. Would you comment on that statement?
Well, I would do both. And the reason why I'm so pro-nuclear is that it is a huge generator of power. And once you build these plants, as I said before, it is also the cheapest source of energy. And it's 100% clean. I mean, nobody's for pollution. Whether you believe all the stuff about global warming or not, and I have my doubts, I'm no scientist, I don't know. But no one wants pollution. And if we could get on clean energy, I would love to live in a world where we all had cars that we plugged into the wall that were produced by electricity, or we depended upon natural gas, or something else was invented that would give us the opportunity to be completely off foreign oil at least, and then maybe someday completely off oil. I don't want to have another oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Nuclear, to me, is the way that we can get to a place where we're energy independent.
Got about a minute here before we close out. We got an email as the President's Speaker Series has been pitched the idea of doing a debate on fair tax next spring before the April 15th deadline, so we're going to start working on that. But our writer wanted to know if, in fact, you have an opinion on fair tax one way or the other. Assuming Republican control, is this something that is viable, or are you not on board?
Well, I think to have a national sales tax or a uniform tax, I would want to see us repeal the amendment in the Constitution that gives the right for an income tax. What I would be afraid of if we did any kind of sales tax or value-added tax is that once you give Congress the power to do something, they're going to do it. And they're going to tax you more and more. So I don't want an income tax and a sales tax. Right now we have 6 tax brackets. That's too many. There's a proposal out there by Senator Judd Gregg from New Hampshire to go to 3, 15, 25, and 35. We certainly don't need to tax people more in this country. We don't have a taxing problem. We've got a spending problem. You know, I want the American people to have more of their tax dollars back because I believe the American people could spend their money on themselves and their families and their businesses better than the government ever can. But we've got a lot of taxes in this state in Florida. I mean, we have income tax, thankfully no state income tax. Our property taxes are way too high. I mean, we make it very difficult for people to own a home here. We make it very difficult to attract businesses because of high property taxes. So I'm a believer in less taxes. I am open to a discussion on an innovative way to do it, but I don't want to be in a situation where we give the government more power to tax because they'll never stop doing it.
The next event in our series will be an interfaith event. It'll be November 17th, but keep listening and keep watching because we'll have information about other events. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Senator George LeMieux.
Thank you.
On behalf of President John Johnson, thank you all for attending. For our radio audience, news from Fox, messages, and then back with our second hour, and congressional candidate Sandra Adams when we continue on WNDB Daytona Beach.
Don't ask, don't tell.